I think as a species, we're still trying to figure this out. Our brains aren't quite wired to handle it all yet. Maybe we'll grow
Yeah.
another lobe of our brain as time goes along, but I think it's overwhelming many of us, and it takes tremendous self-discipline to keep it shrunken down to size in our lives.
Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Beyond the Bar podcast. I'm your host, Denise Satova. And today I have the pleasure of talking to Dr. Jeffrey Wittmann. He's a licensed psychologist and a trial consultant for lawyers. And it's on cases where parents are fighting over their children. He helps lawyers and judges understand the psychological issues involved in these cases and really how to make the best decisions for the kids. And he is not just any expert. He's the guy who teaches the judges, he writes amazing articles, and he even came up with a way to check the quality of child custody evaluations. So he's done a lot of important work in the family law, and I am actually looking forward to getting to know him outside of his titles and accomplishments as well. Welcome to the show, Dr. Whitman.
Nisa, thank you. Thanks for those kind words. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. So I like to dive right in. Tell me your story. How did you get into the field of, I guess you would call it a forensic psychology? That is such an important work.
It's funny because it's a bit of an oddball story. I historically had a whole other life in terms of my professional interests. I had an interest in doing research on the psychology of religion. That was a passion of mine. I actually did do research in the psychology of religion for my master's degree in clinical psychology. I ended up practicing at a master's level, working in an area of the field that held my attention for a few years, but very quickly I was realizing I needed to do something different. I wasn't particularly happy with my work life, and my brother-in-law happened to look at a newspaper ad 2 cities over from me with an advertisement for a master's level forensic psychologist, which those positions hardly exist anywhere. And I said, I don't even know what forensic psychology is. I answered the ad. I got hired at a county clinic, and that put me in the good trenches of doing forensic assessments, something that I had to figure out myself, had to read a lot of books, read a lot of research because I had very little training. And I had to do that in a county setting with disadvantaged families. And it's the best thing I've ever done. I mean, I just laid the groundwork for what I would subsequently do, which was to eventually enter into private practice and do private forensic evaluations or evaluations on contract with counties, um, and uh, and then things kind of evolved from there toward what I'm doing now, which is primarily trial consultation for attorneys in child custody assessment area.
What does that look like for our viewers and listeners? If you can simplify the concept. So if someone's going through divorce, parents going through divorce, and I imagine the courts, they have to assist in making really tough decisions about the parenting time. Um, when do you come in? When would they call upon you?
Right. No, it's a good question. I spent the earlier part of my forensic career doing forensic assessments, seeing families and children, doing evaluations for courts, seeing children and parents for therapy as they were going through divorce. So it was a combination of helping and evaluating. Ultimately, what that all evolved into, and we'll probably be talking in a little while about some of my involvement with Timothy Tippins, professor at Albany Law, and other things that I've done from a scholarly perspective. But what it's come to today is that when there is a child custody matter and there has been a psychological or psychiatric report that offers opinions about the custody related issues that the court is struggling with, I am these days most often called to do what are called peer reviews or work product reviews of those forensic evaluations to give the attorneys an opinion about the evidentiary or the reliability of the report, well, whether it was conducted according to our best forensic standards. And then I offer an analysis and an opinion about that report. In some cases, I'm involved then in preparing to testify about that report and let the court educate the court about its strengths and weaknesses. In many other cases, attorneys hire me as a background trial consultant to help them get ready for trial, to help them craft cross-examinations, which is a pretty significant part of my practice. So that's a non-testimonial, pure background consultation mode, which is actually, I really enjoy both of those hats, wearing both of those hats.
I want to step aside a little bit because I, well, I guess outside of that field, I am fascinated. I am a curious person by nature, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, it is a craft to be able to ask good questions. And it's something that's, I think it's grossly missing from our conventional educational system. And it's, to me, it's been so helpful in connecting with people and really deepening relationships. And so you get involved in trials where you get to cross-examine, or you are cross-examined. You help other attorneys get prepare them for trial. What, in your view, uh, what tips would you give to learn good questioning?
Yeah, a really important question. I mean, uh, I'm struck by how much work is involved in a well-crafted cross-examination. You just can't throw these together the night before. Law practices range from solo practitioners who are massively overworked and don't have enough support staff to large practices that have multiple levels of support staff. But in the end, it really requires a lot of time and background research to get ready. Um, I really enjoy that work with attorneys because I think it begins with really thorough analysis. You can some people take the approach to cross examination that I'm going to just go from page 1 to page 50, and as I go through, I'm going to mark off things I want to challenge the witness on, and that's my cross. And I think that that's a real error. And what I try to do is to encourage attorneys to step back and do a kind of a thematic analysis of the report's strengths and weaknesses, and one of the most important steps for me, and I always do this, is to ask myself, what would I be doing if I was on the other side?
Mm.
What would I be doing if the other attorney was examining this witness? What would they be trying to pull out of this witness, so that you're adequately prepared for everything that's going to come at you, all the curveballs that happen in court? So my book, Evaluating Evaluations, gives 4 thematic dimensions and then 222, 23 questions that can be asked about a particular report. Excuse me, 121, 122 questions that can be asked about a report to bring out what you want the judge to see. And so it begins with good analysis, in my view, and you can't get around the hefty work involved in doing that.
And I would imagine I don't know is a good answer as well, rather than trying to make something up.
Absolutely. I mean, you don't, and the old adage, you don't want to ask a question you don't already know the answer to. Those are things that are just really, really important. And um, I think that one of the things that I try to do in my consultation practice is to help lawyers understand, get into the mind of the evaluator and understand how they were probably seeing this particular litigant, this particular parent or child, what may have been tripping them up. Understand what can go wrong in an evaluation, what should be going right, and again, anticipate what your adversary is going to be doing. And part of the dilemma is that our documents as a field, the field of forensic psychology, and particularly where it's applied to child custody, our documents keep changing. We
Mm.
just had a major update in our big guiding documents for forensic custody work, both those by the American Psychological Association, and then probably the best one out there, the guidelines for parenting plan evaluations by the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts. Well, those keep changing, and that's one of the functions of consultation that I most enjoy, which is keeping law firms up to date with how the field is shifting over time.
You mentioned Timothy Tippins, who is a legend in the legal field, great friend of our mutual friend. So you wrote, I would say, groundbreaking article that really changed the way people do child custody evaluations. What was the main message? And 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 why did you write it?
That was probably an important event both for Tim and I. We, kind of a funny story. We both grew up in upstate New York and didn't know each other. I knew him by reputation, both as a professor and as a practitioner. But then we ended up in a very chance way speaking at what used to be called Law Guardian, now Attorneys for the Child, a Law Guardian conference, and we were both speaking separately. We had not Our presentations had nothing to do with each other. We both got done and realized we were both voicing deep skepticism about what mental health professionals do when they recommend specifically who should have custody, for example, what the schedule should be for a child. We were both saying that independently of one another. So we looked at each other and said, why don't we do some work together? So we began to kind of teach publicly on the topic. We started to craft an article, the article that you're referring to, from the Family Court Review in 2005. I think it was Empirical and Ethical Problems with Child Custody Recommendations, a call for clinical humility and judicial vigilance. And that was the theme of it. We basically started off with a model of, that we tried to model the clinical inference process for evaluators and the different ways you could slice what they do into categories, and so people could understand the clinical and forensic judgment process. And then we, and especially Tim, did an excellent job making clear why, when you look at child custody opinions from an evidentiary perspective, from the landmark cases like Fry and Daubert, that they really don't hold muster. And so what we proposed was a model of forensic assessment that basically said psychology has a massive amount to offer in terms of helping family court and matrimonial court judges make these difficult decisions. We have a huge library of research on children, families, parenting. We are highly skilled interviewers. We do have some psychological tests that are occasionally very helpful, but we have gone too far in what we're willing to say to the courts when we begin to opine about. Therefore, Your Honor, it is my opinion that it is best for these children to be placed primarily with their father and see their mother every other weekend and on Hanukkah or whatever. I mean, these kind of specific recommendations that imply a predictive power on our part. The bottom line is we don't have. So we have a lot to offer right up to that big monumental question that can help the court make the decision, but it's really not ours, obviously, to make. And we shouldn't pretend that we have a sufficient empirical or research basis to make it.
That is a critical work. I mean, that's something that impacts families the rest of their lives, and those are tough decisions. I'm curious. What have you learned about yourself through this process and through this work? And how has this career path, how has that impacted you as a parent?
Ah, wait, that's a great question. I didn't even expect that one. That's a good one.
Well, good.
I'll start with that because I began my career doing married and not, and I then went through that stage of life where I met my amazing wife. We have two amazing boys, and I felt really, for the first time, I fully understood how difficult parenting is. I fully understood how reasonable people like myself can be made very irrational by difficult, challenging, threatening moments in family life. Times where you just feel like you don't have the stuff, or where your child or your teenager is pushing you to the breaking point, so to speak. And anybody that has kids knows those moments. I felt like I was um, a vastly improved evaluator and much more and therapist back when I was doing therapy, because I had a kind of understanding and empathy for people that I hadn't had before. I thought I did, but I needed to kind of be in the shoes of a parent to really fully understand it. The other thing that I think happened for me was that I did a fair amount of training in preparation for being a divorce mediator. So that was something else I did in the earlier part of my career. And one of the most important things I learned in my studies there was from a psychologist named Carl Schneiderer, a formerly Harvard trained psychologist who's a teacher in mediation. And one of the things that I took away from Carl's training was that we were missing the boat in working with divorcing families by focusing on the angry, sometimes crazy dance they're doing while they're involved in court, and that we're missing the reality that what's really going on underneath all that anger and crazy dancing are very tender feelings of fear, terror, embarrassment, shame. I can't believe you left me. A desire to come back to court to get affirmation of my value as a parent after being set aside. So that was transformative for me with respect to my own empathy too. I started changing my training for judges and lawyers in the direction of getting them to focus on the tender stuff that was happening as people did the angry dance in front of the judge's bench.
That's very well said. I actually practiced in a different state as I'd say divorce financial mediator, and
Oh,
I have
interesting.
seen
Yeah.
that. Yeah, I've noticed that it was almost, I would call it that they would act from the shadow side, and realize very quickly that it was masking the fear. And once you're able to bring them back to sort of the civility, where they could respect, one another. There was something there. There was something to work with, and in other words, not treating them as criminals. And I never separated people. I kept them in one room, and I actually had done virtual work way before COVID, and it was almost like where they could sit, in their own environment if I had done it virtually, and were comfortable. But that is so true. They're human beings, and they're just very scared.
And
Um,
with your practice, I mean, when I look at what what you do, what I find fascinating about it is that, at least my sense is that you're working with the financial nuts and bolts that a family is trying to renegotiate, make sense out of,
yeah.
settle about, or whatever the case details are. But with that area of money is so emotionally powered. And what you just said was perfect, which is that really, the distinction we make in my field is between primary and secondary emotion. And so you may have people coming into a financial negotiation or whatever it is that you're doing with the case, and they're doing what looks like an angry, irrational dance. And what you just said makes clear that you understand that there's a primary emotion underneath that, which is very often fear and terror. That's one of them. along with embarrassment and shame and all the other difficult things that people go through.
And then the process, if you have practitioners who sort of buy into it, they become immersed in it, in the litigated settings, that's not exactly helping because I think it fosters more shame, more anger, and fear, and it fuels the conflict. And then things sort of drag out, and kids tend to be in the middle. So I like to take the practical approach and just bring it down to, look, there these economics here, and some decisions have to be made. And I understand this is emotionally difficult and emotionally laden, but let's just focus on that part of it, and
Yeah.
instead of trying to, perpetuate the conflict. So that is, yeah, that is truly fascinating. So obviously, and you wear so many roles, responsibilities, and what you do is it is a tremendously important work. How do you recharge? How do you reset?
Good question. Um, no, I love to read. Big disclosure here that when I walk out the door at the end of the day, I do not read things in my field. I prefer to go home and read a good piece of fiction or other in other areas other than psychology. But my great love is the water, sailing, is
Wow.
kayaking, paddleboarding. Those that's that's the place I want to go as often as I can get there. So
Hmm. That sounds so relaxing.
that's it
It
when I
really
can do it.
does. Yeah,
Yeah,
something
yeah.
about water and the motion. It really does. Yeah. I was curious. You said you had boys. How how would they describe you?
Wow. God, wish they were here to help us with that. Yeah. I think they think I'm a pretty nice guy. we've got
Yeah.
we've got we've got a good relationship. I'm blessed with two guys that'll still call me for advice, and that always means something to me. And they're doing they're young men in New York City, and they're doing great, and very proud of them.
Mm, that's nice. I had an interesting discussion with Tim Tippins, and he's not particularly fond of social media, and it's a tough thing for many parents. Um, what is your take on? We can't obviously stop it. Our kids have access to it. Everybody has access to it. Um, in addition to that, I guess going back to people going through transition of divorce, that's certainly not helpful if, the parents engage in posting stuff out there for their kids to see. Um, how do you think about it, and what is the conversation that you have with your kids about the role of social media?
Yeah, I know it's interesting because I see some things and some signals from both of them that they are figuring out they've got to control that area of their lives a little bit more carefully. But they're launched and in their mid to late 20s and have their own lifestyle now. But they grew up when this was all really exploding, and we as parents, my wife and I, didn't have our heads wrapped around it. We did everything that we thought was right at the time. Now when I look, we have a local school system where I live in upstate New York. Most of my business is in Manhattan, but I live upstate, and it's one of the uh, first schools to entirely ban cell phones during the school day, including at lunchtime. And I recently
Wow.
read a summary from the staff about what they had witnessed in the last year. And I know that this is anecdotal, but it
Mm,
sounds transformative. They said, we couldn't believe the fact that they are now talking to one another in the hallways. They were standing talking in groups, and they had not been doing that before. At lunchtime, they were looking at each other because they didn't have a phone. And while they were eating and they were having conversation. So now if I were having kids now, I would probably have much more, there would be much more media free time than probably we had allowed, to be honest.
That's interesting. Actually, well, my daughter, she'll be 25, and she says, "Mom, I remember when actually you used to ask us to put our phones away after a certain hour,
Right,
actually at the dinner table, and we thought you were just cruel and unfair." And now I see it. I see it
right.
where, my peers, my friends of the same age, they can't even communicate. They feel so socially awkward. And when I have my kids, I'll do exactly the same. Yeah.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Yep, and we tried all of that, but then there's the crush of just the culture outside of the home, and,
Mm.
it's something that, I think really, to be honest, I think as a species, we're still trying to figure this out. We don't Our brains aren't quite wired to handle it all yet. Maybe we'll grow
Yeah.
another lobe of our brain as as time goes along, but I think it's overwhelming many of us, and, it takes tremendous self-discipline to keep it shrunken down to size in our lives.
No, that you said that what you said is very interesting. We're still trying to figure out how to handle all of this. It seems like after COVID, there's been this surge of changes, technology. We moved from a physical to more of a virtual world. There's so much that's being thrown at us, and I think it does cause a lot of anxiety. So finding that balance and just being able to be still, and just being more aware of who you really are and stop, trying to compare yourself and looking outward what you should be. That's becoming more and more of a challenge. Well, so as we're bringing it to sadly to the finish line, we'll definitely have you back. What are some of your parting thoughts, comments, message that you'd like to share with our viewers?
Sure. I mean, one of the things that I'd want to say in closing is that, I have spent a chunk of my professional career emphasizing the importance of humility and remembering what we don't know as we go to offer our opinions to the courts. And people know me for that stance, as something that I've emphasized over and over again. However, things have shifted a bit toward, in certain areas, the wholesale rejection of what forensic psychologists do. And that is something that I equally object to. That my colleagues and me, to an extent, over the years, also give voice to children's pain. We also spot things that would not have been spotted if we hadn't been involved, so that the courts can make a sensitive decision for children. We help judges to understand the painful dynamics between a mother and father that may be causing their children to be symptomatic. So I also want to emphasize that we've got a massive amount to offer the courts in this area. We just have to do it in a more conservative and cautious way than has historically been the case.
Thank you so much, Dr. Whitman. It's been incredibly insightful to get a glimpse into the world of forensic psychology and really your life. And thank you so much for sharing your story and your experience with us.
You're very welcome, Denise. You're doing really important work with this show. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And to our viewers and listeners, to find out more about Dr. Jeffrey Whitman, you can find his bio link below in the show notes. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Beyond the Bar Podcast. Follow us on all social media. And until next time, stay curious and stay inspired.